So about a year and a half ago, I made a video on what's become my favorite third-party controller that you can buy for your Switch or your PC or your Raspberry Pi, and that being the SN30 Pro Plus. It is a very, very good value at $50, and when I heard that 8BitDo was going to try a follow-up to this controller, I was interested, but I was also a little nervous, mostly because this controller is already very, very good. So I was concerned they would try to do a bit too much and maybe mess it up. But turns out they created the 8BitDo Pro 2 that is more of a refinement of what is already a great controller. So they asked if I want to take a look at it. I said, yep, send it over, and we'll see what we come up with here on the channel as we go through, unbox it, and open it up, and I give you guys some of my initial impressions on the controller. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawn channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first, let's take a look around the box here. This is the Pro 2 Bluetooth gamepad. I'm very happy, by the way, that they changed the name, because SN30 Pro Plus from 8BitDo, that didn't really roll off the tongue very well. Marketing and all of that, probably not the best when it comes to trying to get that name across. Going to 8BitDo Pro 2, much better, and also that means they could probably do things like, oh, the Pro 3 controller, the Pro 4. Basically, it sets them up to have several iterations of this controller going forward, where hopefully they just continue to improve and refine this one. And yeah, you're seeing it here. It looks very much the same. Like in terms of its overall form factor from this angle, it mostly is. There are some small changes on the front here, like this little button here with a couple of LED spots, but otherwise the front configuration isn't that different. If we flip it over to the back here, we can see some of the different platforms that support this controller with the Switch, Mac, Windows, Steam, Android, and Raspberry Pi. So if you've set up a RetroPie, for example, this controller is an awesome thing to get paired with that. And this, as you can see, is the gray edition. Sliding off the slip cover here and opening the box. The unboxing is pretty straightforward. We have our controller here, the instructions, and we have a USB Type A to Type C charge cable. It's an all right length. I'd say it's about 4 feet or so. Actually, it's about 3 feet now I'm looking at it. And it does charge, as I said, through USB Type-C. That's not new or anything for 8BitDo, and I'm just happy to see that we are to the point now where we more or less expect our controllers to have USB-C. Peel the plastic off of our buttons here. These are glossy buttons, and we can see the design I had for this one was more in line with what Nintendo did with like the Super Nintendo. But I do like kind of the colored buttons here with A, B, X, and Y, and it is the same format and setup minus this button here. This actually controls the different profiles that you can set up for this controller. But the biggest difference for this one compared to the SN30 Pro Plus controller is on the back. And this is where things actually get pretty good in terms of the overall refinement that they've done to it. So first things first, you'll notice we do have a couple of macro buttons back here that can be set up to basically shortcut certain buttons on the front here. We've seen this with a bunch of other third-party controllers, and even someone like Sony or Microsoft using that for the Elite controller, or that attachment that Sony put out for their DualShock controller. These are actually pretty good overall. They have a lot of tension to them, so it's not something that you're accidentally gonna press if you are, say, resting your fingers on it when you are playing. And they overall give a pretty satisfying click when you press down on them. You can actually hear it if I hold it up here. We also have a switch that will change between which platform it's being used for. So, for example, we have SADX, so we have like Switch, Android, Windows, or Mac, and it's just a slider that you move around, which is great because before you'd have to do a button combination, and there were times where I'd kind of get lost and forget which configuration I had set up because I was using this at times for a Raspberry Pi, or I would switch it over and use it for like my Nintendo Switch. This way I could just flip this around, take a look and say, okay, it's set up right now for the Switch. Let me move it over so it's used for Android, for example, or if I want to use it for Windows. Much better this way. They also decided to change the back out with a more textured back for better grip. I mean, you can see the difference here in the split of plastic from the front to the back. And this is basically a bunch of very small dots all over the back here, and you feel it right away. It just has a better grip overall for when you're holding it versus this one, the SN30 Pro Plus, that was just all smooth, much like the front. Now, the other thing they introduced here was the ability to use your phone to change the button combinations or do a ton of different customization to the controller rather than have to rely on connecting it to a PC. I mean, you'll pretty much always have your phone with you, and it's pretty easy to set up. They have their Ultimate Software app on the Play Store, for example, if you're using Android like I am here, and it'll just detect the controller through Bluetooth, sync up, and then you get this menu right here where you can go through on the left and change, for example, your profiles. Then you can go to your mapping, so you can basically alter any of the buttons where they are, and of course you can play around with the bottom macro buttons. You can also play around with the sticks in real time, which, by the way, so if I kind of move this, it shows that right there on the screen next to it. You can play around with like the dead zones, any of that, as well as anything when it comes to the analog triggers, how far you have to press down for it to activate. Basically, everything you were doing before with the 8BitDo Ultimate Software with the SN30 Pro Plus has been moved over here. We can also mess around with the vibration sensitivity that will rumble in real time. So if I press that and put this down here, we'll have this start to move around, as well as you see down here, the motion sensitivity, whether it's lower or higher, because this will support gyro. Oh, there's also an option here to swap the D-pad and the left stick, which if you had a game like, let's say, Link's Awakening that wouldn't let you use the D-pad for movement, you had to use that for other things, well, you can swap them internally with the controller, and then the game will believe that you are using the thumbstick when in actuality you're using the D-pad. So it's a nice feature to have. I just like the overall ability to customize and swap between the profiles very, very easily on the fly. I think 8BitDo has been making a lot of improvements overall with their Ultimate Software and the ability to access all the customization you do in it without having to always go back to your phone or your computer every time you want to make a change. So I figure while we're here, we'll go ahead and pop the back off. At least I want to take a look at the macro buttons on the back here. For the most part, I expect this to be very, very similar to that SN30 Pro Plus, mostly because they didn't make a massive amount of changes, but I still think it'd be worth taking a look inside. And just in case you do have to take this controller apart, we have 2 screws down here, and then we have 2 screws up here underneath of the sticker, 1 in each corner. This will then lift up, and we can take a look at our controller completely here, where we have 2 separate boards with this cable that runs between them, so you'll have to unhook that. We do have our older rumble motors down here. I mean, they do advertise it as not having like HD rumble for the Switch or any of that. But then we can see that we do have our macro buttons on this side here underneath this board. And looking around this bottom board here where we have our analog sticks and the macro buttons on the other side, there are a ton of screws, like all the way around here. And that's mostly just gonna make it so that this board is stable, since you're gonna be mostly smashing these macro buttons over and over again, or dropping batteries or the battery pack in here. They just want to make sure this board is as flat and sturdy as possible. Oh, and as I'm removing all these screws, real quick, let me point out these plastic bracings here for you. These will make it so that if you're twisting the controller or any of that, it'll feel way more stable. And these are also right behind the D-pad and A, B, X, and Y. It just, for the most part, makes the controller feel higher quality. Okay, with the board removed, we can see our 2 tactile buttons that work as our macro buttons on the back, and these have a lot of tension to them and they spring back very, very quickly. And that appears to be what this relies on, as this is mostly just a floating plastic button with no springs or any of that. Basically, you press down and this waits for the button to spring it backwards so that it has that nice click. As for the rest of the controller, like the D-pad and the buttons, there's really not much of a difference compared to the SN30 Pro Plus. This is still one of the best D-pads you can get currently on any third-party, or I'll even say first-party controller. The buttons are very responsive and the overall ergonomics are great. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for the 8BitDo Pro 2 controller. Is this a massive jump from the SN30 Pro Plus? Not really, no. It's more of a refinement, as I've been saying, but we didn't really need a massive jump from that controller because it was already really good. In fact, if 8BitDo went too far with it, they could actually have ruined the design and the functionality of the controller. But there are still some things I would like to see them continue to do as they go along in what I guess is their Pro Series controller. For one, this still does not turn on the Nintendo Switch out of sleep mode. It says it right in the instructions, and that's something I point out from third-party controllers, because because we've had so many that will do that. It's also not using the newer rumble motors with the advanced haptic feedback that we see in the DualSense and the Switch itself. So those are a few things I would like to see them continue to improve on. And you know what? I think I'm ready to see 8BitDo attempt a premium controller, one that's a bit more expensive but has even higher quality parts, because I think they have this design down pat, and I would like to see what else they could do if there was more leeway, say, in the design budget. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below with the 8-Bit Pro 2 controller. If you're looking for a good third-party controller with a lot of functionality for your PC, your Switch, or even your Raspberry Pi, yeah, I completely recommend this one at $50. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.